Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 420, which is Molly Pabian, who is the head of studio over at Crafty Apes. Molly's a wonderful person. She and I worked in the past, and she's had an incredible career, actually, and she tells us all about it, as, of course, we find out about her background starting in film school. Actually, she said she had an interest in this back in middle school, but then she went to film school, and then she somehow got very interested in both production and visual effects, which is pretty cool. And, took that. She started as a PA from Digital Dimension, and all the way through her career became the head of studio at Crafty Apes, which is a really great company and has done some amazing work. She's really on top of the game in terms of what production is and what that role means. And there's many little different things, steps that happen along there. And I think a lot of people, when they think of visual effects studio, they think of the glory of being an animator or an effects artist or whatever they happen to be, but they don't think about the production staff that's behind them and supporting them and creating all the amazing, making the infrastructure work for them to be able to do the work that they do. And producers are really, really cool. And so Molly sort of talks us through that, tells us a little bit about, the steps that it takes and the different responsibilities that different levels have at different studios. And it was really good to see that and to talk about that. And then for those of you who are ever interested in visual effects or interested in production, that's a really great way to sort of understand what that means and what those roles are. Besides that, it was really great talking to Molly and to see, what she's doing over at Crafty. Okay, we've got a couple of announcements. We mentioned V-Ray 6 for 3ds Max is out. There's a lot of great things going on. That's update 1. Sorry, update 1 is out. Lots of cool stuff going on. There's some masking tools that's happening in the frame buffer that is helping with lens effects and denoisers and things like that. So if you want to mask out certain areas that do or don't take on certain effects, you can do that. There are lots of USD stuff that's happening as well. We've done a lot of updates in that area. Faster scene loading, environments, fog renders a lot faster, and we're using also a whole lot less RAM for textures on the V-Ray GPU. So really cool to see all of that. Make sure and check it out. Just go to chaos.com and check out any of our product updates. And of course, you'll be asking, when are the other products coming out? They're coming out very, very soon. In fact, I saw some really interesting updates. And of course, we will let you know on the podcast when those come out. As far as events are concerned, April 4th and 5th, we will be in Paris for BIM World Paris. So go check us out there if you're going to be there. April 16th through the 21st, we will be in Munich, Germany for BUA 2023. And April 24th through 26th, we will be in Stuttgart, Germany for nothing less than FMX 2023. Very excited. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to be able to make it to FMX this year, but that's still up in the air, but we will see very soon. So make sure and check us out. Of course, you can find out all the events we're going to if you just go to chaos.com/events. Again, that is chaos.com/events. Okay, cool. And if you guys want to know more about the podcast, you can always follow us on Facebook. We are at facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast, or you can just go directly to our page, which is chaos.com/CG Garage. And if you'd like to watch these podcasts, which I always recommend because it's a lot of fun, and we're getting more and more people that are looking at checking out podcasts through video now, you just go to youtube.com/chaosgrouptv, and all the podcasts are posted there along in video, along with the regular podcast. And of course, if you have other ideas or questions or comments or anything you'd like to talk about on the podcast, and we're getting a lot of them these days, just make sure and let us know. Just email us. It's the best way to do it. That is labs@chaos.com. Again, that is labs@chaos.com. We would love to hear from you. Of course, don't forget to leave us a rating on your Apple Podcast. Leave us a review. We would always love to see that as well. But for now, please enjoy episode number 420 with Molly Pabian.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
First time we met was on Real Steel, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so I've known you since then, which has been a long time ago now, but you've done some amazing things since then, which we're going to get into. But it's kind of like the movies, when you start in the middle of the story and then you try to find a backstory and then you get to the middle of the movie and you're back at the beginning of the story and then you can go forward. So that's what I want to do. So that Real Steel is where we met and you were coordinator there, and that was the first time you and I worked together, and it was really interesting. But let's go through the backstory. So how did all of that start? Like, what got you interested in filmmaking and all this stuff before that?
Great. So this goes back to probably middle school or something. I grew up in Michigan and always loved movies. That was something that we would do on the regular. We'd go to the movies every weekend or multiple movies in the weekend.
Sure.
And then I got really into scary movies in particular. So I would see like all of the Screams, all the Final Destinations. And I kind of dabbled in like script writing and stuff. And then junior year of high school, you take your SATs, and to this day, I still don't really know how my film school caught up with me.
Sure.
But I think it's because I checked like interested in media film production, like on that form. And so then Brooks Institute of Photography called me and like out of the blue and was just like, hey, we're a film school in Ventura, California. We have a photography program that is renowned and it's in Santa Barbara, but we're opening up this new film division. We want to talk to you. We'd love for you to come out and check out the school. It's a year-round 3-year program. And so I was like, oh, okay. and from there we were I was like, Mom, like, could we go? Like, this is something I'm really interested in. And luckily my parents were always super supportive, and they were like, well, if this is your dream, like, let's go check it out. So we went for my, like midwinter break or something of that year, checked out the school, made sure it was real. Their like claim to fame is that the Aaron Brockovich set was there.
Okay.
So you like go and see the inside of her house. There's some other stuff. I forget what other movie it was. There's some like Mexican street facade. And so we got the tour, and pretty much from then it was like, all right, I'm going to California. So went to film school. This was in 2004. So I was set to graduate in 2007. And when I was there, you didn't get into visual effects until like the last year of your schooling. So you start off with, photography, learning like rule of thirds, all of the basic things, lenses, all of that. Then you get into making a short. And then I took some script writing classes again. And then you got into like your major for the program. So they offered a feature route, a commercial route, and a visual effects route. And visual effects is probably the main thing I was always interested in. Growing up, my favorite movies were Willow, Death Becomes Her, Jurassic Park. So looking back, I was like, oh my gosh, every movie was like this big visual effects movie. Not really like putting it together that this was a real job, right? So I was like, okay, I'm going to take the visual effects track. And they taught me light wave and combustion, which at the time was slowly getting phased out. But I didn't know, and so then I didn't necessarily like what I was learning from my teachers. And so I was like, okay, I need to get more like hands-on experience. So I started cold calling essentially visual effects companies. And I started with movies that I really liked. So back to my horror Final Destination thing. I love that log sequence. Yeah. So for Final Destination
that 2, is one of the first big things ever rendered in V-Ray, believe it or not.
Oh, wow. No way.
Yeah. It was a big, there's actually one more that Digital Dimension did. It was a digi-double of, what was that? The Dragon movie with Matthew McConaughey. Fire something.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I don't know that
Rain of Fire. And there was a digi-double. He was like teeny and he was like 3 seconds. But then they said, oh, this worked well. And they did the big log sequences. Vlada was so proud of that. He was like, this is the first big visual effects thing. It was an amazing sequence.
Yeah, it was super amazing. So I found their not VP, but their executive producers information. Luckily, they got back to me.
Wow.
And I got an interview. Normally, they had only taken interns from Emerson College because he is from Boston.
Okay.
And he was like, we actually didn't have someone submit this year. So I got the internship. Just total luck, which is crazy because I probably cold called or emailed like 50 different companies.
Right.
So they took me on. And then before I graduated, they actually brought me on as their PA. Okay. So I was at Digital Dimension for about 3 years. And then they went under during the writer's strike.
Yes.
So we were supposed
to. But it was the one here in like on the Burbank, Hollywood area, right? Sort of like.
Yeah. We were in Burbank. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes. So we were supposed to get more work on Wolverine and a few other projects, but the writer's strike delayed all of this stuff and we didn't have enough to continue. So we ended up closing. And at that time, I was like, oh my gosh, this is my first job. I don't have any contacts. I don't know what to do. Everyone was super great. They were like, we'll help you look for jobs. We'll help introduce you to people. So from there, I ended up going to U&Co, where I worked on Gamer for pretty much, they were just starting to develop their feature pipeline, but previously they were all motion graphics. Mm-hmm. So I worked there for a bit. And then Chris Del Conte reached back out to me, who was the EP that was my boss at DD, or Digital Dimension.
Yeah, the other one.
The other DD. And so he was over at Frantic Films at the time. Yep. So he brought me over there. And so I had moved my way up to coordinating at this time. So I was a coordinator over there throughout the switch from Frantic Films to Prime Focus. So we worked on Avatar, the first one, at Frantic Films. Mm-hmm. And then when we transitioned to Prime Focus, we were the first vendor to fully stereoize a feature, which was Clash of the Titans. Mm-hmm. So that was wild. That was probably the most I ever worked.
Wow.
And so from there, Charlene Go, who was a fellow coordinator with me at Frantic Films, she had already gone to Digital Domain. She was working on G.I. Joe, I believe.
Okay, yeah.
And she was like, hey, we're interviewing for other chords. So then that's how I got into DD. I interviewed for T3 and Real Steel. And I decided to go with Real Steel because Charlene was on that. And so that kind of brings us to where I met you.
Okay. So, but you, I mean, you were learning Lightwave and combustion. So did you never have an interest in being an artist? Did you what landed you into the sort of production side of things?
Yeah. So when I interned, I was doing PA work, essentially. I was kind of updating their elements library and then started following around the coordinators. There was definitely opportunities to learn on the box, and the PA that I actually took over the role from was also learning late at night, like how to roto and do junior comp and things. And so he moved over into an artist role, which freed up the PA position for me. And they had offered me, plenty of opportunities, but there was something about how my mind works and being in that PA position. I was like, oh, like I kind of love spreadsheets, like it's not something I thought I ever would have said before, but after dabbling with it, then I really fell in love with it.
I think that's a skill set that is underappreciated. I know everyone wants the glory of being an animator or whatever, or they think it's going to be a glorious thing. It's not always glorious. I think there's something amazing about, I've always appreciated anyone who's a really great coordinator, producer, all those people, they put pieces together of a puzzle that is incomprehensible to me. So I know how good that is. And I honestly am like, if I have to do all of that work myself, I would fail miserably. So I know the value of a good production person and how that works. So it's interesting that you saw that in yourself and you're like, this is kind of fun. Like being able to take a bird's eye view and look down and see how you're going to solve this problem.
Yeah. And it's so funny because, after being in the industry for so long, talking with artists, a lot of the times they'll say 90% of my job is technical,
Right.
and so the artist isn't quite as creative as like you imagine it to be when you're young, So I feel like I probably would have hated problem solving all of that stuff.
Your render's broken. Fix it. Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, so that's interesting. Okay, so Real Steel, was a fun film, and so you're at this point you're in it. You're a coordinator. You're working on big features, and you're working at some of the top shops in the world. So, where did you go from there? Where did you take this journey?
So after Real Steel, I ended up going over to Rhythm and Hues.
Okay.
I was hired for Chipwrecked, Elvin 3. So worked on that. And I was in charge of the India teams. So I had slightly offset hours, and all of my team was over in Mumbai and some other locations. But we had my supervisor, my comp soup, and my CG soup that were in LA. So we would go over dailies, and I was kind of the point person from that. And then I went on to Life of Pi after that, similar role. And then Eric Nash ended up calling me to bring me back to DD. He called me personally, and I later learned that was their technique to make sure I came back. So I went back for Iron Man 3.
Right. I remember.
Yeah, which was crazy in itself because that was when everyone filed for bankruptcy.
That's right. Yes. Yes.
So it was a very challenging show. And
you just came from Life of Pi.
Yeah.
So you've been just watching these major visual effects houses just crumbling in front of you.
Yeah. So the funny thing is that at that time, Rhythm and Hues was trying to get me to go on to RIPD.
Right.
And then Eric called, and I was like, okay, I'll go back. Then we filed for bankruptcy. And then I was like, oh man, like, should I go back to R&H? Because they were like trying to bring me back. And then they filed for bankruptcy like 2 months later or something. And so I was like, oh man, well, I guess it's good I stayed here. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's actually kind of amazing that, through that process, that they did file for bankruptcy, but somehow survived and never missed a paycheck.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I felt very blessed that I was always paid.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that's interesting that they gave asked Eric to to call you. Just for those people, Eric Nash was the VFX supervisor on Real Steel and also on Iron Man 3. So that was his tag. He's a very fun guy. He's been on this podcast, but he's a very fun person.
Great.
Yeah. Yes. I like Eric a lot. Okay. All right.
So then.
Yeah, go ahead.
Should I keep going?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So after Iron Man 3, I went on to Category 6 at DD, and then they were trying to figure out where I was going to go next. And at that time, it was just like, I was fried, it was just so much. So I ended up taking the summer off, which is still like the best thing I've ever done.
Nice.
I feel like when you're freelancing, because this whole time I'm freelance. So when you're freelancing, you don't think about like, okay, I'm going to take this breather. You're always looking for the next hustle to make sure that you can pay for all of your rent and the groceries and all these things. So you never really like take advantage of that time off. And so that was the first time where I was like, I'm just going to take 3 months and see what happens.
Right.
And very glad that I did. So from there, I went to Method, where I worked on Thor 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I got a really good opportunity to go to Shade VFX as a producer. On Iron Man 3, I was brought in as a production manager. So I was kind of already like climbing. And then I got a great opportunity to become a producer at Shade because they were a smaller boutique, like 30 people. Yeah. I was only going to be covering for a maternity leave. So I was like, okay, let's roll the dice, see what happens.
Shade was in Santa Monica? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they were at Bergamot Station.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yep.
So I went there. It was like day one, I was getting trained up by their producer and how they do things. And then the next morning, she's like, I just got mandated bed rest. So good luck. So I was
Wow.
like, oh my gosh. But luckily, I was able to pick it all up and carried on. And then after that, she decided that she wanted to stay a stay-at-home mom for a little bit. And so I ended up staying at Shade for probably 6 years.
6 years. Wow.
Yeah.
What was it like going from, especially in the production side of things, going from the, big, 300 person shows to like, a very small boutique place?
Yeah, it's so wild. Like at the bigger shops, everything is so department based. And so
Yeah.
you have coordinators for lighting, anim, effects, and then you have like 3 production managers and then 2 producers or digital producers and then the real producer.
Right.
So there's like all of these layers of all of the things that you're looking after. And then at Shade, it was just me and a coordinator.
Yep.
So all of a sudden now we're handling everything, and so you really have to wear multiple hats and really think about every project that you're working on is kind of sequences, because you're not working on a 500 shot show, you're working on 3 100 shot shows,
Right.
so you still have a lot that you're juggling, but the biggest thing is that you're just all hands on deck. And what I really liked about it is that you learn so much about all of the roles and all of the departments instead of being just put in that one department that you're overseeing.
Do you think, what was your favorite part of it in terms of, obviously you have to do things like you got to find the crews, you got to get all that. Well, let's start with the show coming in. Show comes in, you got to bid it, right? So you got to figure out how much it's going to cost and what you're going to do. And then you got to talk to people that are, find the people that are involved. Actually, you tell me what the different parts are. You know better than I do. Tell me what they are. And then what's your favorite parts of it? Like what's the one you like the most?
Great. So a new show comes in, usually get quick time. Sometimes you're involved early enough where you're getting scripts and you're breaking down from the script. Finding, best approaches, like, is this going to be a green screen? Is this going to be a blue screen? Are you going to shoot it practically? Is it now an LED screen? Should we put in some contingencies for aliasing or whatever, issues that have popped up with those? Working with the supervisors to talk about the best approach. Is this 2D blood? Is this 3D blood? Do we have the resources to do a CG eel? And so you're kind of figuring out like, who would we need for these things? At the smaller shop, you are doing a lot of 2D work. So your 2D team is very strong. And then you have just a couple of very senior generalists that can do, animation through lighting,
Right.
asset build as well. So we didn't have a lot of hiring for like special cases, but we did do a show with a CG Buffalo. So we did need to hire a hair person, so you try to take on the work that that you can accomplish well, and that you have the resources to do. And then there's that rare occurrence where, okay, yep, we need to get someone in here to do grooms. So,
Right.
but my favorite part is, and still probably will always be, just seeing, start to final product. It's so rewarding to be able to produce something that isn't real, or that you would never guess there was visual effects, seamless visual effects or invisible effects, whatever the term is.
Sure.
Is the most rewarding for me, because people believe that you did it and they didn't even know you were involved. And it's like, all right, you thought it was real. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I always tell people, it's like the irony of what we do is like, if people never realize we did anything, then we won.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So you like sort of trying to figure those things out, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was a VFX supervisor, I loved the bidding process, because it's like, this is the time to be the most creative when there's no solution yet. We have to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that's really cool. Okay. So you spent 6 years at Shade, which is great. So you learned a lot of skills during that process, I'm sure.
Yes. Yes. It was super valuable experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world. I loved working there. I loved the team. You just dug into so many things. And so from there, I went to DNEG, LA, where I worked on the first season of Picard. And to go from small shop to big shop was just shocking. It's like,
Really?
I've worked at the big shops before. And so I didn't think I would be shocked, but then it was like, oh my gosh, I need to go through all of these different departments now instead of having one person just take this shot like from start to finish, So it was like trying to get back into, exchanging things, passing this off to this person, to then this person, and so on and so on. And it really made me value or appreciate how much everyone did at Shade, and how diverse they are in their skill sets. It really is just unbelievable what generalists can do.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think it's interesting. I think that the idea of generalists is definitely coming back as an asset. It used to be sort of, especially larger shops, like, well, generalists are just not very good.
Yeah.
You need a specialist to really get high quality. And that's absolutely not true at all. And I think and you get it faster too, because it just passes it on to themselves.
Yep.
Yep. Cool. So then you were able to check all of that out, and see that transition. What besides the dealing with bureaucracy, what were some of the other things that you figured out?
That's a good question. I feel like, the big shops are always super exciting because you work on such meaty things.
Sure.
So we got back into, full CG set extensions, big spaceships, big battles. And then we also had monthlies with the rest of the offices. And so you got to see, behind the scenes of Jungle Cruise and, I forget what other projects were happening at the time, but it was just like, oh my gosh, they're doing this whole like setup with all of these vines and trees. And, it's just incredible. Probably Dune was happening at the time, I'm sure.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just incredible to see all of that stuff and to see how they go throughout, several months of monthlies, like they would submit like, here's a gray shaded effects play blast of sand, and then all of a sudden you see the final comp months later and you're like, wow, like it's just inspiring, to see such high quality work done.
Yeah. I used to love going to monthlies. I thought those were fascinating. And then being really proud when you're a junior artist, if your shot is in monthlies,
Yeah.
And people are like, woo! It's like, yeah, they like my work. That was really cool. So that's cool. All right. So how long were you at DNEG for?
I was only there for Picard.
Okay.
And then Crafty Apes, which is where I am now, was knocking at my door since the second I went over there. A lot of people from Shade ended up going over there after Shade had closed.
Okay.
And so, well, they didn't close at the time. They had done a scale back. And so a lot of the people that I had worked with went to Crafty. And so they talked with the Ledoux and Jason Sanford. And so they kept calling me and they're like, whenever you're ready, like, we're ready for you. And so I ended up going over there and it was the best decision that I made. It's really been the best place that I've worked because I get the Shade feeling of the more boutique, generalist, all hands on deck vibe, but we still get some really meaty stuff. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds for me.
Yeah. And I have been just so impressed with how quickly it's grown as a company.
Yeah.
Like it is just unbelievable. Cause I remember, seeing it's like, oh, who's Crafty Apes? And now suddenly like they're everywhere.
They're everywhere.
And then, that's only in a few years that I think that's been going on, which is kind of amazing. Okay. So you were, tell us a little bit about Crafty Apes. I mean, what was your role going into it and what are you doing now?
Cool. So I was brought in as a senior producer. So I started producing, my first project was Purge 5. And then I had I was in this role for probably a little over a year.
Okay.
And then Tim Ledoux was the head of studio at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he was looking to take a sabbatical. So he had reached out to me about becoming head of studio. And I had always thought, like, this is out of my grasp. This is never something a producer would get the opportunity to.
Yeah.
I always kind of had my eyes set on head of production. So that was like my next logical step.
Right.
And Tim was like, well, I've already given you a lot of the stuff that I do. You're kind of doing the role. How about you accept it? And I was like, am I doing it? I'm all questioning it. Like, am I doing it?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I guess I am.
Yeah.
So I accepted the role with the what's the word? The condition that Brandon Nelson would be my creative director, because my biggest concern was that I wouldn't know how to help fix like a shot,
Sure.
like I don't have that artist background. So I was like, as long as someone can dig into scripts and like help the artist when that is needed, then I'm fine, running the rest of it. So he accepted, thank goodness.
Yeah.
And so I've been in this role for a little over a year now.
Yep.
And it's been incredible. I've learned so much, and I feel like the team is my babies, like watching over everybody, making sure that they're growing, giving them shots to help them grow, making sure they're on the right projects for the growth, all kinds of stuff. It's been extremely rewarding.
Well, that's very interesting. I'd love to. Okay, so for my audience, a lot of people who are sort of learning about the industry or whatever, give people an overview of what those different production roles are, and especially now head of studio is very different. But let's even start back down to at coordinator.
Yeah.
Not to say that it's a lower case, but a coordinator still is. There's a lot of work to be done there.
Yes. So coordinators day-to-day is directly communicating with the artists, making sure that they know when their tasks are due, making sure they're communicating when other departments are ready so that they can start their work, or if that other department that they're waiting on is delayed, giving them the heads up of that the schedule is shifting, making sure that our database shot grid is up to date with, hey, this is good to go, this is waiting, we got notes, updating dates in there, and then also client management, replying to client emails, downloading stuff, bringing it online, making sure it's in the right folders, that everything's linked in ShotGrid as well so that you can see the reference in there, and then doing deliveries for the client as well. So we'll probably do deliveries every day or every other day. Really depends on how urgent the show is.
Okay. So very valuable having a good coordinator. And as someone, like you said, who I was a lead on a lot of stuff over at DD, and leads would have coordinators, and to help the coordinator or the artist lead would like focus on the work, and the coordinator would make sure to pick you up and put you in front of the right problem.
Yes, directing traffic.
You stand here, solve this problem. I'm going to check on something else. I was like, so a good coordinator is really good at that. And I'm always very valuable. It's like, I don't know where I need to be. You tell me. So it's really cool having a good coordinator. Okay, so after coordinator, what's the next logical step in the hierarchy?
So a lot of people have production managers. Some smaller shops will go from coordinator to associate producer. So these roles are very similar depending on where you are, but you have a more eagle-eyed view of the coordinators. You're making sure that they're looking at the right things, that if there's something super urgent, that they're then prioritizing something else, where the coordinators focus more on day to day. The production manager is probably looking at the full week, making sure that we're hitting our department deadlines, communicating with the producer. The coordinator does that as well, but also maybe figuring out if we have the right resources, kind of help with resourcing, or if someone's overloaded, like, hey, this CG artist actually has 10 things, I think we could reassign 5 things, kind of just looking more globally at the project. but still a lot of the same things, always checking, dates and work balance and making sure everything's up to date.
Yeah. So for example, like we used to do shot boards, right? So you'd look at all the shots that are due for the week, and a production manager will just make sure that everything looks balanced and doable. Right?
Yep. Yes.
Right.
And usually the production manager has several coordinators under them that they are then using to delegate the day-to-day tasks.
Gotcha. Okay. And then then you're starting to move into the associate producer role. So what are some of those responsibilities?
Yeah. So on top of all of the other things, the big difference is that you start getting more involved with the bidding process, learning what man-days are, learning what your day rate is, learning what price points are right for which clients, really dissecting what goes into a shot, making sure that it's bid correctly. Like I was saying earlier, if it's 2D versus a 3D approach, knowing the difference in the prices for those different things. So bidding and financial tracking, you start looking at the health of the show. Are they going over budget on a task? Do we need to reassign because we don't think that they're going to get there in the 2 hours that are left? So really management of the health of the show and making sure that you're hitting a good margin.
Right. Okay. So that's starting to interface with the client more.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And then what does a producer do?
So producer, I would say, is very similar to the associate producer, but you would probably get a bigger project. Associate producers usually are under a producer to help on a big project, or they have their own smaller shows that they can run that maybe their project only has phone comps, or it's only beauty work. Sure. I don't want to say only, it's all work, but more straightforward, less department type work. So then the producer would do all of the same things, but on a grander scale. Usually the budget is probably, $1 million plus, lot more shot count type work. But really building that clientele, talking with them, calling them, making sure that you're looking at the right amount of scope increases, charging for the scope increases, having
change orders,
conversation, change orders. Yep. Also hard discussions of, hey, we just got this note and our deadline's tomorrow, but this goes back to animation, so talking about schedule changes as well, is a lot of the producer.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So then you've got head of production, right? That's above.
Yes.
Is that what does a head of production do? And that's when you're starting to talk more studio levels things, right?
Yep. So head of production will oversee all of the producers. They probably oversee all of the production, but you would start with the producers, then delegate down. So it's really making sure that bids across all of the producers are the same, that we're bidding out all the things the same way, that we're running our shows the same way, going to them. A producer would go to them if they're having an issue with a client that they're not quite sure how to handle. Maybe they've never been in that situation before. So really a soundboard for the producers when the client might be telling them things that they don't know how to handle, whether it's, deadline or saying that that's not a scope change, but we think that it is.
Right.
So trying to be the peacemaker between the producer and the client side.
Okay. All right. And that's really kind of it's almost like taking each of the shows and just making sure you have resources spread across each of the show and stuff. And sometimes saying, can we borrow some of your compositors for like 2 weeks?
Yep.
Yep. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. Well, that makes sense. Now, head of studio.
Head of studio.
Which is where you are now. So what is a head of studio?
Yeah. So my main responsibilities now, artist allocations. So depending on where you are, this could also be the head of production, making sure they know where the resources are, that they're being utilized. since I come from the production background, I kind of probably take on more of that role than maybe a VFX soup would that's in this role. So it's all kind of a little fluid between the two. They're very cohesive together, like working in harmony. But resources for shows, also in charge of assigning supervisors, producers for shows. What else do I do? Making sure everything is running the way that it should, making sure that Brandon or other supervisors are using the right approach for certain shots, regardless of if it was bid one way. Maybe internal conversation will make it so that it's different for a better approach that might have the same result but faster. I look at the overall health of the whole LA office in terms of, is everyone hitting their margins? Planning events, making sure crew morale stays up, giving reviews, giving feedback, really just trying to make sure that everyone is growing in their role that they're in and continuing their career trajectory as well. So a lot of one-on-one meetings, making sure people are getting the type of work that they want, what they're looking for in the future. So health of all of the people under me.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. It's funny. I should note that one of my everyone knows that I love to fly fish in this podcast because I talk about it all the time. But one of my fly fishing buddies is a compositor over at Crafty, and then he found out that you were like, I knew he was like, oh my God, she's it's like yeah. So he's very like, what do you think? What do you think, Molly? You know, because when you're a junior, sometimes you get a little self-conscious about yourself, and so he was kind of wondering, it's like how all that going. But he's doing really well, and I'm proud of him, and it's really cool to sort of see that career path. And now I know why it's being so well managed, because you're in charge. I do.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, it's interesting because having juniors or mids, working in this work from home work environment has been super challenging, so that's something that I've been strategizing with as well, to have some in-person learning. Our office kind of like just became a graveyard for office chairs for a long time.
Right.
And so it wasn't like a place that you could like go and work at. And so I've been working with our IT to get our second story up and running so that we can have like 10 people in at a time. So that's a big initiative that we have for this year, to have that like, hey, what do you think of this, mentality? Because it's a little difficult in work from home. One thing that we do is have a mentor-mentee system that I've had help with Nicholas Daniels, being really great at picking people that are mentors and can train other people, like how we do things at Crafty, and also how just other tips and tricks that you would learn that you would have probably picked up with someone sitting next to you. But yeah, definitely looking for more ways to help improve everyone grow. So always a challenge.
Well, I find that fascinating. And I started realizing, because I was going to ask you this question, and then I started realizing you're telling me your story with when you were working at Rhythm and Hues, you were kind of working with people remotely at that time.
Yes, true. Yes.
So you kind of already
true.
knew how to manage that a little bit, which was interesting. One thing that I've always been impressed with is that, during COVID, certain visual effects houses really suffered, and you guys didn't. You guys thrived.
Yes.
So I'm really, really interested in finding out, what do you think were some of the help make that happen for you guys?
Yeah, I feel like we over doubled in size during COVID, which is remarkable because people were closing or scaling back. And a lot of that just went out to our EPs and sales department. They went over anything and everything. If they heard that someone was lessening their crew, they would go to the executive on the client side and say, hey, we have resources if they're not able to take all of their original work, And so that's where a lot of things came from us. Or came to us. But sorry, I forget what the question is. I went on a tangent.
About thriving during COVID.
Oh, yes. Okay. And so Crafty's mentality has always been, all right, we have the artists. now we have too many artists. You need to find work. So then they find work. And then, okay, now we have too much work. We need more artists. So then we get more artists. And it's like, okay, now we have too many artists, get more work. So it's always been that kind of back and forth. And it's just incredible that we've never really been a freelance studio. You know, our policy has always kind of been like, be with us for 3 months and then we'll bring you on as staff. And so we kind of have just like kept that trajectory going. You know, as long as there's work, you know, we were always able to make it happen. And we took full advantage of anything that we had heard about that might need extra hands. And, you know, we're not going after, you know, the big city destruction shots. You know, we're going after quick things that are easy to peel off. And that's been our bread and butter. And it really keeps, you know, the work coming.
What's fascinating to me is that, and as you just described, it's like, okay, I have too many artists, so I need more work. So now I have too much work, I need more artists. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes you just have too many artists and they're overworked and they all quit and everything goes to hell. Or you never get more work, right? Yeah. And so that's also a problem. And then you have to lay off artists. There's got to be, you guys have been succeeding. You managed to find more artists during a time when there's less artists available. Yeah. And you've also found a lot of work during times when people were not necessarily finding it. I mean, but that's a testament to how you guys run the studio. It's got to be.
Yeah. When I said earlier, you know, that Crafty is one of the best places that I ever worked, it's also because somehow we maintain the work-life balance. I've been places with you where, you know, we're working 12-hour days, 7 days a week for months at a time, you know. Even when we're at our craziest, it's very rare that we are working the weekends or working over 50 hours a week. So wow. I think that that's really what keeps people staying. And it's just a way that we do things. There's a lot of factors, obviously, good production, good supervisors, the right type of work, you know, because if all you're doing is super big CG stuff, you know, that's very low margin work. So if you have some CG, but then a ton of beauty work or phone comps, you know, then things balance out to where you have really high profit margin versus middle of the road or low profit margin.
Right. Well, that's fascinating. I think that's a good point. What are some of the other things I think, you know, that contribute to it? And in terms of the artist level, let's start with that. You know, you guys, before COVID, one of the things that Crafty did is they opened lots of smaller offices with all tax incentive places, right? So Louisiana, Georgia, Vancouver, et cetera, right? But since COVID, you've got a wider net that you can throw out there because you can find artists in different locations. Do you think that you guys knew how to do that? And like, what contributed to your artist pool?
Yeah, it's definitely a learning experience. You know, anytime that you have a new office, training up people in the Crafty way is the big part of the onboarding process. Like that, hey, you're not going to have lighting and this and that, you know, like you're going to have, that's a bad example. I don't know. But right. There's like things where, hey, you're doing all of this and then, you know, that's the Crafty way. Or, right. Hey, this was supposed to be 3D, but we found this new way to do it in V-Ray setup for Nuke, you know? Right. So it's like, there's a lot of different approaches that go about things. So teaching people how to work that way is the main thing. But what also is really nice is that we have just 2 servers for all of our locations. We have an East Coast and a West Coast server. And even before COVID, we were working back and forth all the time. And the system is so easy. It's like you just hit right click sync and then it syncs the folder to the other server and then it's mirrored. So the file structure is super easy to navigate. And so if LA was looking tight, then Atlanta, that was the main studio that we were working back and forth with, would be like, oh, I have people. Okay, right click sync, you know? So it was like all of a sudden you're working with them. And the funny thing is that I think working remote has even made that process better, because before you would kind of be in LA and thinking, all right, let's have our meeting. And then you would have your meeting and then you're like, oh crap, I need to zoom in Atlanta, or I need to gather these artists that are at another studio. Where now everyone is digital or virtual, so you just ping everybody and then everyone comes, so
Right.
in that way it's easier, which is funny. But yeah, you definitely use all of the locations for your advantage. Another thing that I neglected to talk about with producers is that you figure out the splits between rebate and non-rebate locations. So a lot of our shows offer like, hey, we'll do 50% in Vancouver, 50% in LA, or 30% in Vancouver, 70% in LA. So we're able to offer some rebates for the clients, which makes us really competitive. And we're able to take advantage of the artists in those locations, but then also we're able to use any location for the non-rebatable part. It doesn't have to be LA, it can be anywhere. So we kind of have the system where we talk in our heads of studio meetings where we're like, all right, well, this project's wrapping up, so these people are going to be free. Let's grab them. They're going to go on to this show. And yeah, it's just one big community pot kind of in some ways.
Yeah, I think that's really, really smart. Really, really smart. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the work, because Crafty, as you said, you guys get a lot of work, and there's also a ton of stuff being made on the streaming side. And that's one of the stuff that you guys are really good at, is streaming content, right? So how did that sort of, how did that all work itself out in terms of, being good at specifically those types of projects?
Well, it's interesting because I feel like the line of quality is so blurred now. It's like streaming is essentially feature quality, but a few episodes of it, So I feel like if you just look at it as, hey, we're doing the same approach regardless of TV versus streaming versus feature, we're literally just doing the best approach for everything, then that I think is what leads to the success. When you have like a TV team or a commercial team or something, they're not going to grow and have the skill sets as other people. But when you're forced into doing all of the different formats, then you just work the best way possible for the product. And I think that that's something that we do very well.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I'm not necessarily saying that streaming is lesser in any ways.
Yeah.
I think there's just a lot of it.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of it. And it's really kind of interesting. So since, obviously, like you mentioned LED walls as a thing that's happening. I mean, have you seen way more demand for virtual production in the last few years?
We've definitely seen an increase. But since we're still kind of dabbling in virtual production, our Baton Rouge and Atlanta team are kind of the ones really spearheading that. I don't feel super comfortable talking about where we are with the technology, but
no, that's fine. But I'm just wondering, in terms of generally, like from the industry's point of view, are you seeing a lot more demand for that kind of stuff in general?
Yeah, I think it's always, if it's right for the product, I think people are very smart when it will be beneficial to them and when it's not. We definitely are seeing an uptick of it, but there still are only so many places that you can do it. So it's not probably as in high of demand as you would think.
Sure. Okay. Yes. All right. Well, that's a good thing to think about. Now, here's my other weird question for you. A lot of people are very just freaking out over all the AI stuff that's happening right now. As far, from everything from artists to scriptwriters to apparently Vlado just told me that he saw a presentation of ChatGPT-4 where they fed it a tax code and give people their finances and they did their taxes for them.
What? No. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we'll see. But here's my question for you. as far as the studio is concerned, from your point of view, sort of you're in a great sort of overview looking at what's happening. What is your position on like how are we paying attention to how this is going to affect us in terms of our workload, in terms of the expertise that we're hiring, and more?
Yeah, I think that my hope is that we will use it to be more streamlined.
Right.
Like I could see it being a huge benefit for breaking down scripts,
Right.
like, hey, instead of me going through and highlighting what I think is a visual effects and then copy and pasting it into the Excel to then add man days to, maybe that will be able to be automated by, this robot or AI, a way to maybe trace roto and then have the machine learn to follow the person for the rest of the shot. There's ways that we can use it that I think will make things very fast. I personally don't think that it will take over our jobs, at least not yet. But I've also seen people use it to write scripts. If they need a way to automate something like, hey, I have this file that I need renamed on these scripts, or I need to update this node to this node on these shots, like using it like that has been super beneficial, and people are able to do it super easy instead of going to IT or their pipeline people, to get that sorted. They're able to take it on themselves. So I think it's super exciting. But we'll see where it gets with the creative stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I should know that I've actually been wanting to get Sean Looper on. I know Sean pretty well, and he's a great guy. So maybe he could help me dive into this a little bit. They want to put it, but from your point of view, I'm just wondering, like, is it it obviously sounds like it's something that Crafty is paying attention to at some point.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Are you seeing new types of artists and new skill sets that you need to hire for those positions?
Yeah, we definitely have had a big uptick in machine learning, people that we have hired. A lot of that is under Sean Looper and Chris Ledoux right now, so I don't have quite all of the insights to it, but I know that they're learning a lot. And deep fake technology is another one where we really need where we've seen a lot of demand for it. So getting people to learn deep fake is also an agenda for us.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, very cool. Now, here's your opportunity to tell us some of the cool stuff that's coming out at Crafty Apes that you can tell us of. Obviously, there's lots of things that you can't tell us. But what are some of the things we can look forward to in the near future?
Great. Shows that we recently wrapped. Some of them are out. We worked on some of the episodes for The Last of Us.
Awesome.
That was Vancouver, and then LA helped with some of the last 3 episodes.
Yeah.
We just wrapped on 1923, which is actually out already.
Yes.
We did a lot of blood and wound stuff for that show.
Okay.
Also, a lot of creative split screens for when they're up a tree and there's a herd of hyenas and lions under them. So that was all shot practically. That we did a bunch of splits for, some CG grass to help blend, CG elephant carcass.
Nice.
So super fun stuff.
Yeah.
And then other things that are coming out soon. We just wrapped on John Wick 4.
Nice.
The new Indiana Jones.
Wonderful.
And trying to think what else. Those are the ones that come immediately to mind.
Awesome. Well, that's very exciting. That's very exciting. And what I'll do is I'll make sure that in the podcast thing, we'll have notes on how to get in touch with you guys in case people are looking for work or recommendations. Great. I'm sure they'll be able to get in touch with you that way.
Yes, happy to chat.
Yeah. Molly, thank you so much. It's very, very exciting talking to you and to learn more about Crafty. I'm going to definitely have to get Sean on as well. But it was really cool. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. I had a blast.